all of you this week. Look, I know already. Don't get started. I can't believe that I have to put a trigger warning in front of this whole thing. I understand that some of you will hear this and you will think to yourselves, he's shilling again. My God, to the depths of the last professional broadcaster, Sam Roberts, his shilling ways. Do they know no bounds? Are there no ends to the limits to which he will shill? I mean, the answer is no. I will shill as long as I have air in my lungs to breathe. However, that's not what this is. Okay? SmackDown closed with Goldberg in the ring. Bill Goldberg in the ring on SmackDown. Big moment. Lights go out. Fiend. I'm sorry, the lights didn't go out. Fiend was right behind Goldberg while the promo was playing. Goldberg knew it was going to happen. Goldberg spears the Fiend. Goldberg moves to the opposite corner of the ring. The Fiend gets up after the spear. They're staring down each other. Goldberg getting ready to do another spear. I think we were all thinking the same thing, thinking the Fiend was going to catch Goldberg mid-spear into a Sister Abigail kiss on the forehead, the whole deal. But boom, the lights go out, the Fiend disappears, and Goldberg is left standing by himself in the ring. As we head to this Thursday for the Super Showdown, and the Universal Championship is on the line, it's Goldberg versus the Fiend. And I'm seeing tweets. I hear everybody. Please, for the love of God, do not let the Fiend lose to Goldberg. Please, after everything that we have invested in the Fiend, do not ruin everything, ruin Bray Wyatt, ruin the Fiend, ruin all of our collective lives by having Bill Goldberg and the Fiend's Universal title streak. You know, the Fiend is a very interesting character. I don't think when the Fiend had what I believe was his first match in August at SummerSlam, you know, I don't think when Bray Wyatt came back and started doing the Firefly Funhouse vignettes, and we saw the Fiend in the ring for the first time, and I don't think the plan was to put the Universal Championship on him right away, especially have Seth Rollins lose to him. But it only took August, September, October. It took 2.5 months for the WWE to realize they got something different with the Fiend and put the Universal title on him. And you know what's amazing? The Fiend never wrestles on TV. Sometimes he's not even on TV. But there's something about that character that makes it a lot more palatable for him to be holding the Universal Championship, to the point where most fans don't want to see him lose that title. Don't ever, to Goldberg or anybody else. This is a conversation I had about the Fiend very early on in the career of this character, and that is that this is, number one, he's not a heel by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, you go to the merch booths at venues, you look at WWE Shop, and you buy a ticket to go to a wrestling show, and you buy one for your kid, too. The kid's going to want to go to the merch stand. What's he going to see? Fiend mask, Fiend gloves, Fiend t-shirt, little bunny puppets. There's a Vince McMahon puppet on WWE Shop. I mean, the Fiend is moving merchandise hand over fist. And oh yeah, nobody boos him. I mean, it made The Miz look completely absurd when he was just standing there angrily as the entire crowd cheered for Bray Wyatt, I believe at TLC. And he wasn't even in the Fiend outfit. The Fiend is an untraditional good guy like the WWE has never seen. As I've said before, the way horror franchise monsters are. In the Friday the 13th series, nobody actually wants to see Jason Voorhees gets killed. Realistically speaking, Jason Voorhees is a good guy. Nobody really wants to see Freddy Krueger get killed and Nightmare on Elm Street. He has to, just for the story to be told, but nobody really wants to see it. Nobody sits there going like, oh, I hope that the camp counselor, I hope that this girl from this town who keeps falling asleep, I hope they win. Nobody wants them to win. That's why the people that win and beat the villains are never around for the sequel, but the monsters are. Nobody actually wants to see Laurie Strode beat Michael Myers. And that's the most clear case, right? Laurie Strode is theoretically the biggest babyface in the history of film. But if we as an audience were given a choice, either Laurie Strode can survive or Michael Myers can survive. First of all, we would want both of them to survive because we want this battle to go on for as long as possible. But nobody really wants to see Jamie Lee Curtis kill Michael Myers. It's the same thing with The Fiend. Nobody wants to see this guy lose because he's too much fun to watch. He is the living embodiment of a horror film. So there is this fear. I think the majority of people don't actually believe that Goldberg will beat The Fiend. There's not much of a story going into this thing. You know, Goldberg just showed up on SmackDown via Skype 3 weeks ago, said he was watching the Royal Rumble, and it seemed like a good idea to fight The Fiend. And now we're going to do it at Super Showdown. So, I mean, you know, the SmackDown segment was cool and I think very much needed. But it's not like there's this rich history going into this thing. It does seem like it's just a big match being put on because pay-per-views like Super Showdown require big money matches. However, it's Goldberg. There's a very real possibility. While most people think that The Fiend will probably win, everybody also knows that you can't sit there and say, well, obviously Goldberg won't. Because he might. I mean, people said that about when he had a match with Kevin Owens. They certainly said that about his first match with Brock Lesnar. And Goldberg won those matches. That's what changed everything. So what I'm here to do today is to cope with the idea that Bill Goldberg might win the Universal Championship from The Fiend at Super Showdown and how we can spin it into a good thing. I am not advocating for it, although the more I thought about it and the way I saw it playing out, the more I was like, it actually might be better. But I am not advocating, although it will be spun. And people will say, I stopped listening to Sam's podcast after he said that Goldberg should beat The Fiend. Then stop listening. I don't care. Because that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, I am an eternal optimist. I watch WWE, and I don't like watching things that I don't enjoy. So oftentimes, in scenarios like this, what I will do is I will look at all, like a lawyer looks at all sides of the argument, right? If you're a defense lawyer, you have studied any argument that a good defense lawyer studies any argument that the prosecution might have. And they figure out what that argument is, and they argue it with themselves to the point where they can effectively beat themselves arguing the prosecution's case, and that means they're ready to go into that courtroom. What I do is I go, okay, this is what I want to happen. But let's say the thing that I want to happen doesn't happen. How do I not sit there and go #cancel WWE Network? Because that's what today. That's what I want to talk about. What happens if Goldberg does beat The Fiend? Do you tweet #cancel WWE Network? No. Let's be honest. We're not canceling WWE Network before WrestleMania. It's the dumbest time in the world to cancel WWE Network. So that's not going to happen. Instead, we have to look at this in a positive way. Goldberg and The Fiend walk in to Saudi Arabia to Super Showdown. Again, I think The Fiend is going to win the match. And I think that was more evident to me on SmackDown when Goldberg was the one looking strong. Goldberg left SmackDown looking strong with all the offense. Usually, when they paint somebody to be more of an underdog, they end up winning at the pay-per-view. That's just one of those things that happen. So, but again, I don't know how I'd put money on it. I don't know how much money I'd put on it. Certainly wouldn't bet the house on it. So, it might not be that bad, though, if Goldberg beats The Fiend. I know. You're throwing up already. There's vomit all over your car. If you're on the treadmill right now, just make sure you're puking on your own treadmill, not on your neighbor's treadmill. I can't believe he's saying this. Look, it might not be that bad if Goldberg beats The Fiend and becomes the Universal Champion. And here's why. If The Fiend walks into WrestleMania, if The Fiend beats Goldberg, we would have to assume he's going to walk into WrestleMania as Universal Champion. I can't see a scenario where The Fiend beats Goldberg at Super Showdown and then goes on to lose it at Elimination Chamber and goes, it doesn't make any sense. So we have to assume if The Fiend beats Goldberg, he's going to WrestleMania as champion. If The Fiend is going to WrestleMania as champion, I've got to believe that Roman Reigns would be his opponent. Now, an interesting scenario that somebody who will remain nameless painted for me was, imagine if they did Roman Reigns, Baron Corbin, The Fiend. And I went like, yeah. And he went, wait. Like, bear with me here. I understand. Roman Reigns versus Baron Corbin. They even had to acknowledge it on SmackDown that it's been the better part of 6 months. And this match at Super Showdown is the last match. The cage match at Super Showdown is the last one they're doing. Okay. The reason that Baron Corbin is in the match is because you could then have many different results and have it go 100 different ways. You could have Baron Corbin pin Roman Reigns, thus getting the Universal title off The Fiend, still having all those boos, but having them targeted in a right direction. You could have Roman Reigns beat Baron Corbin. You could have The Fiend beat Baron Corbin. There's just many different ways you could do it. So I'm like, okay, that's not, that is a way of getting out of Tampa without destroying everything. But odds are, you're looking at a Roman Reigns Fiend Universal Championship match at WrestleMania. I think that Roman Reigns has to be in the Universal Championship match at WrestleMania. And, my preference is always a one-on-one. It could be a triple threat, but I always prefer a one-on-one, especially major title match. I think that the Roman Reigns has to be in that match because Roman Reigns has been kept out of the title picture ever since returning from cancer. He went away as WWE champion. He went away as champion, had to put the title down, and since coming back, he hasn't been in the title picture, and that has to be for a reason, right? That has to be because when he is in the title picture, we want to make it count. And if he's not in the title match at WrestleMania, I think we now have gotten to a place where we're like, oh, maybe Roman Reigns is not the biggest star on the roster anymore. Up until WrestleMania, we could say, well, they're just waiting. But once we get to WrestleMania, if he's not challenging for the Universal Championship, well, then maybe Roman Reigns is not the superstar that we thought he was. So that's why I think he has to be in the Universal Championship match. I think that it's a very unique situation because it doesn't have to be, nor do I think it should be or will be the main event of the show. I think that the match that you go on last with this year has to be Brock Lesnar versus Drew McIntyre. It's the match that I think people are actually excited about seeing. You've got a bad guy that people are booing. You've got a good guy that people are cheering. Should Drew McIntyre win the WWE Championship from Brock Lesnar, you're crowning a new good guy, face of at least a brand, if not the entire company, in Drew McIntyre for the first time. And I think people are actually behind it. That's the visual you want to go off with. I just don't see any other match coming close to deserving to go on last besides Drew McIntyre and Brock Lesnar. But what that means is you could do a lot with the Universal title picture. That's a match that you can put on. You could technically open the show with it the way they did with Seth and Brock last year. But you could also put it on halfway through the show like you did with Kofi and Bryan last year. You know what I mean? There's a million things you could do. It doesn't have to be that bow that you're putting on the pay-per-view, which I think lets us get away with a lot. It means that if Roman Reigns is fighting for the Universal title at the end of WrestleMania in the last match, then ideally what you want to see is Roman Reigns holding up the title and everybody cheering. But I don't see that happening even this year. And I especially don't see that happening if Bray Wyatt is his opponent. I don't think if The Fiend goes to WrestleMania as the champion and he faces Roman Reigns, I don't think that stadium is going to want to see Roman Reigns beat The Fiend. And I don't think that the people watching at home on the WWE Network are going to want to see Roman Reigns beat The Fiend. But at the same time, I don't know how productive it would be for WWE to have The Fiend beat Roman Reigns. The more I think about The Fiend versus Roman Reigns, the more I think that it's kind of a no-win situation. You know, I mean, unless you want to tell a story where Roman Reigns gets beat by The Fiend, and you can do that because it's halfway through the pay-per-view, not the last match, and Roman Reigns now has to spend the next 4 months, 3 months, trying to figure out how to beat The Fiend, and eventually we get to a place where he can beat The Fiend. I guess that's possible. But I don't know if WrestleMania is the venue for that. And I don't know if that's what you want to do with Roman Reigns. Look, if Goldberg beats The Fiend at Super Showdown, number one, it's probably the best environment for it because I think on that show, the audience is probably going to be responding to Goldberg most favorably just because he's such a big star. And I think the audience at a show like Super Showdown probably really values that. So I feel like that would be the best case scenario to get that reaction. You could say they would never switch the Universal Championship at an international pay-per-view, but they did when The Fiend beat Seth Rollins. You could also say that if Goldberg were to beat The Fiend, that it would destroy everything you've created with Bray Wyatt. And I mean, that's definitely an argument you could make. But it's not necessarily true. When Bray Wyatt and The Fiend, Bray Wyatt, and Seth Rollins went to a no contest at Hell in a Cell, and then The Fiend got right up, right? So the match went to a no contest because Seth Rollins was about to crush The Fiend's skull, and the referee wouldn't let it happen. So he said, I'm just going to call this match off even though we're in Hell in a Cell. And Seth can't pin The Fiend, but I'm just going to call the match off. And then, right when the match was called off and it was over, The Fiend just got right up. And he got right up in a way that made it seem like he could have gotten up earlier. It was maybe the dumbest move in canon that I've ever seen a character make. Why would The Fiend play possum until his opportunity at the Universal Championship had officially ended and then get up? Why would The Fiend not get up right before the referee called the match off to make sure that he didn't lose his opportunity at the Universal Championship? This match wasn't just about winning or losing. It was about walking out with the title. And when the referee calls it a no contest, you don't get to leave with the title. So the fact that The Fiend allowed the match to end, even though he was playing possum, which resulted in him not being the champion, made me go, what is this? Fiend an idiot? Like, what? That doesn't make any sense. However, it didn't damage The Fiend long term. If anything, The Fiend is stronger now than he ever has been as a character. You know why? One simple rule. We don't talk about Hell in a Cell. That's it. We don't talk about Hell in a Cell. How many times has Hell in a Cell come up since Hell in a Cell happened? Seldom, and never since The Fiend won the Universal title against Seth Rollins after Hell in a Cell. It never came up again. The entire time The Fiend has been Universal Champion, Hell in a Cell with Seth Rollins never, ever comes up. After Super Showdown, you still have 5 or 6 weeks to build towards WrestleMania. You still have the ability for The Fiend to come out on SmackDown, lay somebody out, have that person be scared of The Fiend, and have 6 weeks or so to make The Fiend look scary leading into WrestleMania. And you know what you do in those 6 weeks? You never talk about Super Showdown, ever. You don't. Goldberg never mentions who he beat for the title. The Fiend never mentions that he was once champion. Super Showdown as a pay-per-view never comes up in conversation. And the last 3 weeks of Goldberg and The Fiend going back and forth on promos, including The Fiend's NWO parody, none of it ever gets mentioned. Why? Because we don't talk about Hell in a Cell and we don't talk about Super Showdown. And you know what? People love The Fiend so much that I believe they will put up with it. I think in the short term, people will be upset and think this is ridiculous. But within 3 weeks, maybe even less, people will follow whatever story is being told. If it is a good story, if it is a bad story, then people will just go back to being like, well, why did he lose to Goldberg? But if there is a good story coming off the Goldberg loss immediately, and we never talk about Super Showdown ever again, and Goldberg as Universal Champion is just simply, hey, this is the guy who's Universal Champion. Who did he beat? I don't remember. It doesn't matter. We don't talk about all stuff. If that's your attitude, you could theoretically do this without hurting the Fiend. Okay? So that's how you get away with not hurting the Fiend. You just don't talk about when he lost. The same way we don't talk about Hell in a Cell, and because of that, it hasn't hurt the Fiend. Number 2, as I said, if the Fiend walks into WrestleMania as champion and Roman Reigns beats the Fiend, Roman will get booed. I do not believe that Roman Reigns will get booed if he beats Goldberg. I think the Super Showdown crowd will probably be happy to see Goldberg. I think that the WrestleMania crowd in Tampa will be happy to see him lose. Goldberg doesn't have to wrestle between now and WrestleMania. Roman Reigns can go to the Elimination Chamber. He can win the Chamber. And you can go to WrestleMania with Goldberg versus Roman Reigns. And I know you're rolling your eyes going, what kind of main event is Goldberg versus Roman Reigns? It's not the main event. The main event is Drew McIntyre versus Brock Lesnar. You've got your matches. You got Drew McIntyre versus Brock Lesnar. You got Shayna Baszler versus Becky Lynch. These are all theoretically, of course. You got Rhea Ripley versus Charlotte. You got other matches that you can highlight and say, this is why I'm excited. I don't think anybody is going to go into WrestleMania going, I'm excited for WrestleMania because Roman Reigns versus Bill Goldberg. However, Roman's from Tampa, I believe. I think that people will be excited to see Roman Reigns have his moment of glory at the expense of Bill Goldberg. I don't think anybody wants to see Roman Reigns have his moment of glory at the expense of The Fiend. I think everybody would prefer, or most people would prefer, Roman having his moment of glory at the expense of Bill Goldberg, who kind of makes people roll their eyes anyway, if he were champion. Okay? So already in my head, I'm going, I don't know. The Roman Reigns-Goldberg match might be a better WrestleMania match for all parties involved. But then you go, so you're telling me that The Fiend, after all this, is just going to get washed up? No, I didn't say that. You didn't let me finish, okay? I said that The Fiend could immediately start a new story after Super Showdown. And the name of the story would be, we don't talk about Super Showdown. And it would be against somebody that can distract from Super Showdown. The night after Super Showdown, SmackDown, this Friday, John Cena is making his return. Here's how The Fiend could survive losing his Universal title to Goldberg. As John Cena comes out, and I believe SmackDown's in Boston, to talk to his Boston people. Ba-boom, 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 ba-boom. The lights go out, one section after the other, and The Fiend comes out, and he lays out John Cena. Now, I think in order to pull this off beautifully, John Cena should not come out in his jorts. I think we should see movie star John Cena come out. I think we should see James Corden, Jimmy Fallon, John Cena come out. I think we should see John Cena come out looking like he's in Boston to promote Fast and the Furious 9, which really doesn't come out until May, so why would he be on Smack? But we don't, again, let's not ask too many questions here. But looking like he's just there to promote John Cena-ism, which he might be. And then have The Fiend lay out John Cena? If The Fiend lays out John Cena on SmackDown, and all we're doing is putting over what a big deal The Fiend is, and making him look like $1 million as John Cena is left laying, and we are not even talking about the Universal Championship. Like, what if we got to SmackDown and early in the show acknowledged that Goldberg is the Universal Champion? Goldberg's not even on the show. Roman's, he could be on the show, but there's not even a conversation with him. Or maybe he comes out and just brags about beating Baron Corbin or whatever. We don't even talk. We could do SmackDown without even talking about the Universal Championship. And then we assume that Bray is still on the plane coming from Saudi Arabia or whatever. He's not on the show. Only to find out that he is there and he lays out John Cena. At WrestleMania 30, Bray Wyatt had a match against John Cena. And I don't think it did for Bray Wyatt what it was supposed to. In the short term, it put him on that pedestal. But in the long term, it was the beginning of a series of losses that did irreparable damage to the Bray Wyatt character, so much so that he had to disappear and come back as this being that you see before you. There's history there at WrestleMania. 6 years later. 6 years later. Maybe it's time for The Fiend to exact some revenge on John Cena. Now, John Cena, obviously hasn't been announced as having a match at WrestleMania. Who knows if he will have a match at WrestleMania? There's rumors. I think David Meltzer was saying that there was talks of Elias versus John Cena, which doesn't make any sense other than they had a confrontation last year at WrestleMania, but Elias is a good guy now. So and he's also not as big a star as he was last year. So, you could get there, but I think if you had The Fiend versus John Cena, you've got a match that is so big that, again, we can divert our attention away from, what do I want to watch? Why would I want to watch Roman Reigns versus Goldberg? Yeah, it doesn't matter. Cynical Susan, relax. You got The Fiend versus John Cena happening over here. Any wrestling fan that says, I really don't want to see The Fiend versus John Cena in 2020 can jump off a cliff. Okay? Because I don't understand that thinking whatsoever. You don't want to see John Cena in 2020 come back and have a match against The Fiend? You're out of your mind. Okay? It's crazy talk. And it all sets up perfectly. And all the pieces are in line. But in order to get to where we need to get, The Fiend would need to lose to Bill Goldberg. If The Fiend lost to Bill Goldberg, we've got a WrestleMania, theoretically, that could be Drew McIntyre versus Brock Lesnar, Shayna Baszler versus Becky Lynch, Rhea Ripley versus Charlotte, John Cena versus The Fiend, Roman Reigns versus Bill Goldberg. I mean, come on.